This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry, we're just dealing with some.
Oh, sorry, I thought Alicia was good.
We're not gonna be able to hear anybody that's online until we resolve the speaker situation in the room.
Okay.
That's okay. Yes, you just could not hear that it's recording because the speakers are not on. Mr. Alaszewski.
Here.
Ms. Bendixson.
Here.
Ms. Bernal Leon. Ms. Blanchard.
Here.
Mr. Hogg for Ms. Brown.
Here.
Ms. Burks is present online. Mr. Cooley.
Here.
Dr. Day. I think Ms. Weed for Dr. Day. Is she online, Ed?
Not that I see.
Mr. Fitzpatrick. Dr. Flewelling.
Here.
Mr. Glicksberg.
Here.
Ms. Hammer-Levy.
Here.
Dr. Hershoren. Is she online?
No.
Ms. Kessler.
Here.
Ms. Todd for Ms. Crawl.
Here.
Mr. Wilkerson for Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Moyer. Ms. Powers. Mr. Pratt.
Here.
Mr. Freeman.
Here.
Mr. Provenzano.
Here.
Ms. Sussingham. Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Maya. And welcome, everyone. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No.
No changes to the agenda? Okay, we have the meeting minutes from the February 9th Management Board meeting. Any proposed changes or discussion on those minutes? Quiet Friday. All right, hearing none, do we have a motion to accept the minutes?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes from the February 9th Management Board meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On to item number 3, general citizens comments. Do we have any citizens that would like to be heard at this time? We had a dog.
He's quiet too.
All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, the quarterly financial report. Ed.
Yeah, so on page 9 of your packets is our activity through pretty much the halfway point of the year, through March, end of March of this year. So as you can see on that, the table, overall, we're about 50% on most categories, and that's where we want to be in terms of the initial budget that we passed last August. There are some differences, and I'll sort of go through and point those out. In terms of total revenues, we're about 1.4 million, and that's about 45% of what we expected so far in this fiscal year. There's some adjustments that we made to donations. We actually recognize a whole lot more donations so far this year. We're actually hoping for some good news again this weekend for some additional donations to the program. But overall, we'll probably catch up on federal grants and fees and contracts towards the latter part of this fiscal year. On the expense side, there's some notes there that I've mentioned before at the prior February quarter meeting for the financial reports presented there. We had some additional sponsored conferences at the beginning of the fiscal year that we didn't anticipate in developing the initial budget, as well as some volunteer services expenses as it related to our angler surveys that we're conducting at the Skyway Pier. So those are some expenses that we didn't plan for initially last August. What I could do now is, reflect that in our mid-year budget amendment, and that's what's basically what I'm going to be proposing on the next agenda item. Overall, we're about 36% in total expenditures for the year. Any of those projects that don't get completed this fiscal year, a lot of those revenues and expenses will be pushed into the next fiscal year. So it's just a reflection of sort of the pace of some of the projects that are being completed at this point. But overall, that's sort of the activity through the mid part of this year. Now we have to answer any questions on the quarterly financials if you have them.
Anyone have any questions for Ed? All right, there are no questions. Do we have a motion for recommending that the policy board accept the quarterly financial report.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that item? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 5, 2024 mid-year budget amendment.
Yeah, so on page 11, this is basically an opportunity that we have. We don't have to do an amendment every fiscal year, but this is our opportunity to bring our initial budget projections that we passed last August more in line with what we anticipate finalizing at the November meeting in terms of our final budget for the fiscal year 2025 plan year. Overall, I'm proposing some adjustments as it relates to revenues for federal fees and contracts, revenues on that side, as well as reflect the contributions and donations that we've received thus far. As I mentioned, we're also expecting some additional donations through the next quarter as well, but it's not reflected in this mid-year budget amendment. So overall, just a minor adjustment in terms of expected revenues, a little bit 1.5% lower than what we initially planned for last August. And on the expenditure side, I'm making adjustments in terms of postage, line item expenses. We're expecting to do some additional surveys this year, starting that this year. We didn't initially plan for that last August. And then those other expenses and volunteer services, as I mentioned, we're adjusting those based on what we've realized so far and what we anticipate through the rest of this fiscal year. And then the last adjustment I'm proposing to make is on our contracts and consultant services. Again, that's based on the pace of completion of some of our projects, lowering our expectations of what would be billed for this fiscal year. And in total, we're looking at reducing the total expenditures by about 2.8% of what we initially budgeted. Again, this is just to try to bring us a little bit closer to what we will adopt as our final budget at November meeting, and that will reflect our total realized revenues and expenditures that we pass on to the auditor for the current fiscal year. Overall, it's fairly straightforward, but I'd be able to answer any questions you might have on the mid-year budget amendment that we're proposing here.
On the federal revenues, I guess
Yep.
it's just 147,000 less than.
So it's just a matter of when we would recognize those expenditures for the 5 federal grants that we have active at, and actually 6 now that we have active at any one time. So we're not recognizing certain about 150,000 of those expenses in this fiscal year. Those projects and those expenses are probably going to be pushed into the next fiscal year.
I think she did.
We're not losing that money. We're just not showing it as a revenue for this particular fiscal year.
Any additional questions for Ed? Seeing none. Is there a motion to recommend the policy board accept the fiscal year 24 mid-year budget amendment proposal?
So moved.
Second. You have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6, final fiscal year 25 US EPA work.
So this agenda item, the summary of it is on page 12 of your packets, and then linked within that summary is the full work plan, budget and scope. So it's about 119 pages in total, but we tried to kind of distill it to make it a little bit more palatable of what we're actually proposing for this upcoming fiscal year. We presented this as a draft at the last February board meeting, and pretty much all the projects that we identified during that February board meeting remain the same. It's just a matter of finalizing the actual dollar values that we're signing based on federal appropriations that we would receive in the upcoming fiscal year. What we've been indicated from EPA is that we basically will have level funding for the next fiscal year. So our total work plan budget is going to be $1.7 million again. 850 of that is from congressional appropriations that flow through EPA, through the Clean Water Act, and then ultimately to us as a national estuary program. We match those funds with the interlocal agreement contributions each year, and any difference we make up with an in-kind project from one of our partners. This year, we're estimating, you'll see a range there of 646,000 to 647,000 in interlocal agreement contributions, and that relates to basically, we're still waiting on finalizing a potential contribution from Manatee County for the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. If they do contribute to TBRF this year, then there's a slight dues incentive and reduction that would be reflected in our work plan. And that's why you see that range. Until we finalize that, we're uncertain of what the total contribution would be from our interlocal agreement partners. We're hoping to finalize that before the end of the month because we'll have to submit this as an application to EPA in early June. But overall, this work plan comprises the majority of our operating expenses as a program, and then additional grant programs that we administer both internally and also receive from external agencies reflects our total program-wide budget. I'll be presenting that at the August meeting as our initial budget, our program-wide initial budget at the August meeting, which will encompass our work plan plus those additional grant funding that come into our program. But with this work plan, we are able to fund, like I said, almost all of our program operations. We do have some salary and fringe that's covered through some additional grants. But beyond that, we're also able to fund these technical projects and outreach and education projects listed on that summary page here. Just noting again, some of the ranges there for the projects relate to whether or not we would receive that Manatee County contribution through TBRF, and we would adjust that project funding level based on whether or not we recognize that contribution. But in total, we were able to support about $500,000 in additional projects, 4 technical projects, and 6 outreach and education projects. And this year, to make up the difference with the federal funds that we're receiving through the EPA, the City of Tampa has proposed to develop a citywide watershed master plan that would use to make up sort of that in-kind match requirement, make up that $850,000 one-to-one match that's required for those federal dollars. So overall, like I said, the projects haven't changed in terms of what we presented in the draft back in February. We're just finalizing sort of the funding ranges for each of those projects now in passing this final work plan. Budget and scope. After we move through the approvals of the Management and Policy Board, we will turn around and submit this as a grant application to EPA and hopefully have an agreement in place before the start of the fiscal year in October 1. One other thing to note within the work plan is a section completely dedicated to our bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we're also receiving as a National SG program. If you recall, last year we passed a long-term strategy identifying, I think, roughly 12 projects that we'd be funding over the next, from the 2022 to 2026 period. We'll have $4.5 million in total from bill funds through EPA to support additional projects that implement the Tampa Bay CCMP. It equates to about $909,000 each year. And as identified in the long-term plan that you guys adopted and then amended last year at the August meeting, what we're proposing for the year 4 of funding for those bill funds are the 2 projects listed on the bottom there, the Pinellas County Septic to Sewer Conversion Initiative, as well as the City of Largo Wastewater Treatment Plant upgrades and disposal project that the City of Largo has been working on. So this is more of a formality of, presenting this to you as the year 4 funding, but this is actually a separate application that we provide to EPA, and we would receive 2 agreements from EPA for our work plan, and then for this year 4 bill funds that would add on to an existing agreement that we're operating under. So we're just looking for formal approval of both of those work plan projects and the bill funded projects for 2025. I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions, or if you want me to dive deeper into any one of the projects, we'd be happy to do so as well. Questions? Comments, concerns?
Seeing anybody shaking their head, so is everyone good taking?
The private sewer lateral rebate program, can you just elaborate a little bit? What does it entail?
Yeah, similar to the septic to sewer conversion projects that we're helping to support, we're looking at trying to incentivize and provide some additional funds to municipalities that are looking to address those issues. Both Pinellas and City of St. Pete are looking at sort of helping homeowners out in terms of either inspecting, repairing, or replacing failing private laterals and known hotspot areas within the watershed. So that incentive program the money identified there will hopefully help out with any incentive programs that municipalities create. I know Hillsborough County has also been discussing the potential of developing an incentive program as well.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I do have a question on the funds that are being utilized from the bill.
Yeah.
What are the requirements for Pinellas County? I'm just curious what the requirements for Pinellas County and Largo are in terms of reporting that on the use of those funds.
So there's a series of terms and conditions that we have to operate under as an NAP for use of those bill funds. And that was part of developing our long-term strategy. So there's different requirements that EPA is passing through to us. We're trying to direct at least 40% of those to underserved and overburdened communities. And the 12 projects that we've identified more than meet those requirements. I think we are anywhere from 50 to 60% of distributional equity. If you look at the number of projects and the total value of those projects that we're directing. So there are some requirements. There's also Buy American, Build American requirements if there's any infrastructure related components of those projects. But a lot of what we're supporting are moving things along in terms of getting projects to the permitting stage, and then there's some additional implementation dollars that each of the partners would have related to a lot of those projects that we've identified in the long-term plan.
Any additional questions? We have 3 actual motions here. Are you guys comfortable taking them all at once, or do you want to?
All at once.
Together.
Easy.
Easy? All right. So there are 3 recommended actions under number 6, A, B, and C. Recommendations to the policy board for the annual work plan, cooperative agreement, and the bill work plan. Do we have a motion for all 3?
So I'll make the motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for all 3 recommended actions under item 6. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 7, 2024 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund projects. Jessica.
Good morning. Another year, another round of TBRF. So the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, many of you know, but I'll give you a quick reminder, is a competitive award program that we co-manage with Restore America's Estuaries. It's a public-private partnership. We open that request for proposals annually between January and March. That's what we did this year. We then had our review team review, score, and provide findings to our executive director. That review team is made up of the contributors to TBRF. And I just want to say thank you both for your contributions and for the time that you spent on the review team. I know it's a lot of time to commit to. So thank you for that. From there, we have some recommendations in front of you. This year we have, depending on that manatee contribution being finalized, between roughly $725,000 and $816,000 available for projects. We received 14 proposals this year, totaling $2,003,000 and some change. From there, the findings provided to Ed, our director, are before you. We're recommending 4 or 5 projects to be funded, depending on that, either $725,000 or $816,000. There are 3 recommended actions in front of you. Happy to answer questions or provide more details on any of the projects in front of you.
So the 4 projects that we would fund regardless of whether or not Manatee County contributed would be the Crooked River Preserve Hydrologic Assessment, Wetland Restoration Plan, St. Petersburg Septic to Sewer Conversion Project, Pasco County Stormwater Baffle Box System at Lake Paget Estates, and the Little Manatee Restoration Area. And depending upon the funding levels, we would love to fund down to that 5th project, the USF project that is looking at working with students in a church group along the city St. Petersburg shorelines to deploy and develop 3D printed oyster reef habitats using these clay 3D printers that they have in-house. Yes.
So the USF project wouldn't get funded without the additional contribution.
That's what we're proposing now, yeah. Rather come back to the board after we actually realize that we're just asking for your approval to fund up to those 5 projects if we fully get funded with the Manatee County contribution. If not, we would just fund the top 4.
So I'm just curious about the 3D printed oyster habitat. What's the material that's produced out of the 3D printer? Is it a concrete? Is it a plastic?
I believe it's like a
Clay.
clay.
Yeah, it's a ceramic printer. Yeah, and they've created designs and they'll publish those designs as an open science record and yeah, actually create the modules and put them on a certain amount of seawall.
Neat.
Has it been tested somewhere?
I think this would be considered a testing, a pilot, because it's not a huge area that they would be installing these. And then they're also going to be doing, they'll be training the students to do an assessment of how well it's being used by wildlife, both by oyster growth and that sort of thing, and fish, and anything else that they find. So hopefully it'll inform how well these might work for other projects.
I think the hopes would just try to be increase the complexity of the seawall habitat and hopefully allow for growth of oyster spat. But like Jessica said, there'd be additional monitoring that the students would be conducting in relation to the deployments.
Any additional questions? We do have multiple on this one, but I think we're going to have to break them up because we'll probably have, we're going to have some folks who need to.
I can just record the abstentions and then we could take it all as 3, noting those abstentions. So right now, what I'm assuming the abstentions are is that Ms. Bernal-Leon is abstaining from the Stormwater Baffle Box project. Ms. Bendixson is abstaining from the Little Manatee River Restoration Project. And Mr. Freeman is abstaining from the septic to sewer conversions in St. Petersburg. Are there any other abstentions? So they've been noted.
Okay. So we have AB, wait a minute.
Let me get you some coffee.
Okay, maybe an IB right here. So.
It's basically our same standard components. One is to recommend that full list of projects, including those that the project that will be managed by Restore America's Estuaries. The second part of the motion allows Ed to enter into an agreement for those projects that we are recommending funding for and that we'll be managing. And then the last one is, should additional funding become available, it would authorize the executive director to amend the scope and budget up to $25,000, which is within his authority for our operating procedures.
So do we have a motion? Oh, sorry. Start questions.
Question on the recommended actions. So in B,
It's missing the Crooked River project because Restore America's Estuaries will manage that project.
okay.
So we don't authorize Ed to enter into that agreement because Restore America's Estuaries will do that.
You said, and I think I missed it. Thank you.
It is quirky, so it's a good question to clarify.
Yeah, is the language says approved table 1 list of recommended projects. Whole table or just the top?
Just the ones where we indicate recommended funding levels for.
Okay.
And there's
Because
2
it's-
columns.
I think the table's not, okay.
But the table, the recommended funding level for all of those projects,
Oh,
for
okay.
most of them, it's 0.
All right. I'm just looking at the projects. Thank you.
Any additional clarifications?
To find some like summaries or like the applications for these somewhere.
Yeah, they're linked here in the agenda that you have in front of you, and I can also send it to you if you're interested in reading more, or if you want to know a quick rundown of any of them now, I can tell you what I remembered from memory and go from there.
No, you don't have to go through all of them now.
Okay.
I would love to read about them more.
Okay, sure. Yeah, they're linked there, so you can read the summaries and the proposals.
Yeah, it's just above the table caption. You can link to.
Any additional questions or clarifications? All right, do we have a motion for A, B, and C?
I'll make a motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any additional clarifications or discussion items?
And that does include extension, noting the extension.
Ready? Yes, correct. Noting the extension. I'm having a moment.
I'm doing great.
The absence.
There's never a year where this one doesn't trip us up.
I know, it's like every year. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank goodness. Item 8, tire reef assessment, planning and permitting contractor selection. Carrie.
So I'll give you a little bit of background on this project. Back when we did some hard bottom mapping, a tire reef was rediscovered about a mile and a half south of Pinellas Point. So the idea behind this project is we wanted to get a contractor in to, first of all, assess the current condition of the tire reef, its stability and its spatial extent. And then we wanted them to evaluate the environmental benefits versus the potential impacts of removing tires. Because there has been some epiphytal growth on those. And then in addition to that, the contractor will create a restoration plan and do some initial permitting
This is to address the
actions and hopefully provide a cost estimate. So we had 4 submittals, and you can see the companies listed there. The RFP was open from February 14th through the 5th of April. And on April 25th, an evaluation committee met, and the evaluation committee was comprised of some very knowledgeable folks, first of all, in artificial reef development and also in hard bottom communities. Once we went through that evaluation process, we ranked the proposals according to the scoring criteria that was identified in the RFP for each respondent. And you can see the table here of the top ranked respondent, which was Cummins Cedarburg, and the second highest ranked consultant was RES Florida Consulting, and their scores were relatively close, but there was a clear preference for the top respondent. So you have a couple of action items in front of you for this project. We want to recommend the policy board authorize the executive director to negotiate a scope and enter into a contract with the top ranked respondent, Cummins Cedarburg. And if negotiations are not successful with the top ranked respondent, recommend the policy board authorize the executive director to negotiate a scope and enter into a contract with the second ranked respondent, since their scores were relatively close. And then also the third is just to authorize the executive director to amend the scope up to $25,000 if additional funds become available. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the project or the review process.
I know Carrie mentioned it, that Just wanted to clarify for Santino, these are remnant artificial reef that was placed back in the 1970s. So what we're looking to contract this work to do is come up with a potential remediation plan, because there's existing live bottom on some of the placed tires. We'd have to, look at the cost benefits of full removal versus partial capping and stabilizing the area versus full capping, depending on sort of the permitted conditions that might be necessary to come up with a full remediation design. So this contractor would help move those plans along and hopefully get it to a stage where we could seek permits to fully remediate the site.
Is the issue with the tires, I'm sure there are lots of issues, but is it that the organisms are taking it into their, some of the chemicals into their bodies, or what's the harm?
Yeah, it's kind of unknown at this point. There are other artificial tire reefs that are offshore of the Pinellas County coast that have washed ashore during storm events. So some of these, the reef in the bay itself is about a 5-acre site of half sunken tires. So there's that similar concern if we had a major storm event that we get a bunch of tires washing up along Pinellas Point. It's unknown whether or not any of the animals are assimilating the compounds from those tires. They've been in the water for quite some time, but in other areas, particularly like in the Northwest, there's our specific tire components that are causing concerns for salmon fry and causing issues there. But overall, tires aren't an appropriate material to use for artificial reefs. It was in vogue in the 70s, but we recognize things have changed since. So this is looking at, again, ways that we could remediate the site with more appropriate materials. We don't want to take that site away from, although it's not a marked artificial reef, whatever remediation strategy you come up with, we would want to replace it with another artificial reef with more appropriate materials that fishermen can utilize, and it would be actually charted at that point.
And part of that RFP did include some angler surveys to see, how folks are using that reef and, how it would potentially impact their use of it. So.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? So we have three recommended actions. One for authorizing Ed to negotiate scope and fee with the number 1 ranked firm with an amount not to exceed. And if those negotiations are not successful, to move to the second ranked firm, and then allowing Ed to amend the scope and budget up to $25,000 within his authority. Those 3 items. Do we have a motion?
So second.
Second. A motion, a second. Any further discussion on this item? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Number 9, Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel, Maya.
It's not as prolific.
Not all of
I don't think you're gonna be able to use it anymore.
Tried my best. That's all right. So the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel, this item is one that's come to us basically at the request of several of our partners at the county levels. The Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel is an ad hoc group of folks who are familiar and active in the climate science world. It includes folks from both local governments, regional governments, federal agencies, university partners, and the private sector. And really the purpose of the group isn't to produce new science, but it's to sort of wade through the proliferation of documents that are out there, trying to synthesize what what we're observing in terms of climate change, both at a global and national scale, and then apply it down to a regional level. And the intent of this group is really to provide support to local governments who are working to plan for a changing climate. So we know that it can be a lot to wade through all of this really technical information. And for folks who are planners or engineers, this is a very small part of their job. They're maybe not used to reading IPCC reports or other kinds of data sources that are out there. And so this group is really trying to synthesize the best available information and distill it in a way that's actionable for folks who are responsible for making sure that they're protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the constituents in their communities. So this group, the Climate Science Advisory Panel, historically has been convened by Pinellas County and the UF IFAS extension of Florida Sea Grant agent. And that was something that was basically authorized by the Pinellas County Board of County Commissioners back in 2014. That decision to stand up this group of the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel is something that happened concurrent with the release of the third National Climate Assessment. And it really sort of marked the beginning for a lot of the regional coordination activities that started in the Tampa Bay area related to mostly to sea level rise planning. So that group convened, and we worked with scientists and with folks who are local practitioners to make sure that we could come up with a regional projection, a recommended projection of sea level rise for the Tampa Bay region. And those data that we produced, that report was really useful when the legislature then followed up in 2015 and passed the Peril of Flood Act. In 2017, NOAA then updated the technical basis for the projections of sea level rise that are included in those national climate assessments. So we then had a new set of sea level rise numbers that we needed to consider in our local planning efforts. And so the Climate Science Advisory Panel began analyzing all of that information and seeing how we may or may not need to change those regional recommended projections of sea level rise. All of this is going on at the same time that the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council had been convening the One Bay Resilient Communities Working Group. And there had been just an increase in demand to respond not only to national climate assessments, to these continued passage of state legislation, and then just the general interest in addressing climate change at a local level. So then in 2018, the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition was formed by the Regional Planning Council here. And in that the formation of the Regional Resiliency Coalition, that was basically formed by different local governments signing on to a memorandum of understanding. And in that memorandum of understanding, they specifically called out the Climate Science Advisory Panel and the projections of sea level rise that that group had created in the report that was released back in 2015, and expressed a commitment to using those projections consistently throughout the region so that we would be planning on a sort of level playing field and speaking with one voice when it comes to sea level rise, what future sea level rise will mean for the region. At that same time, I had been participating in the Climate Science Advisory Panel since its formation in 2014, but I was asked to step up as a co-facilitator to help not only produce an update to that report for sea level rise recommendations for the Tampa Bay region, but also to help make sure that the group was meeting regularly and that we were having conversations that were really connected to the needs, that were evidence-based and were connected to the needs of you all as the local government partners who are sort of the ones that have to take this information and then do something meaningful with it. So things kind of evolved over time with this ad hoc group, the Climate Science Advisory Panel, and my role in it increased to sort of help the Sea Grant agent maintain and manage that coordinating role. And in 2018, we had another national climate assessment that was released. So if you're sort of getting the idea, basically every couple of years, you're having new data that you need to synthesize and think about if you're planning for sea level rise. There's IPCC reports, so international reports. There's technical reports that are informing national reports. The legislature in Tallahassee is up there passing different laws that pass on these different requirements to you. So it just becomes like quite a bit to deal with and to manage. So we have a new national climate assessment that's based on that technical report that was originally released in 2017. So based on the new sea level rise report in 2017 and then the fourth national climate assessment in 2018, the CSAP reconvened and continued to work through updating the recommended projection of sea level rise for the Tampa Bay region. That report was released. There was quite a bit of press coverage of it, and I'm sure many of you are using that recommendation today in much of your planning efforts. But the landscape sort of governing how we plan for climate change hasn't slowed down at all. And so in 2022, there's actually another technical report, sea level rise technical report, that's going to inform the next national that informs the next national climate assessment that was released. And then the state legislature also established something called the Florida Flood Hub, which as part of that legislation forming the Florida Flood Hub, that calls for the establishment of a statewide working group on the topic of sea level rise, as well as other topics that are climate change related, including things like rainfall. So there's quite a bit of activity in this space. Things have evolved over time, people's interests and their intent to incorporate this information into their planning has changed quite a bit since 2014, when we were still not sure if we could even say climate change. So I think at this point we can see that climate change is ensconced in many of our planning programs, both at the local, state, and federal level. And there's quite a bit of information that everyone needs to process. So the question has sort of been, what's the right way to do this as the players have changed over time? You know, when we first started the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel, there wasn't anyone doing this work here in the Tampa Bay region. And so we were sort of being entrepreneurial bureaucrats and filling a niche and a need that was there. But now we see the proliferation of all these other groups that have an interest in sea level rise planning and climate change planning more broadly. And so the question for the group has sort of been, is this still serving a purpose for you all as practitioners? Are we supporting local governments as they're trying to plan for climate change? And that's sort of a question that has been sort of out there and led to sort of the slowing down of that group meeting regularly, because there's been so much other activity going on in this space. But over the past 6 months or so, I'd say that I hear quite a bit from local government partners asking specifically, are we going to update that 2019 projection of sea level rise for the Tampa Bay region? Is the CSAP still meeting? Is that group relevant? Are they there to provide support, not just for sea level rise, but for other climate change factors? And we've really been kind of dealing with, I told you this group was originally convened by the Pinellas County Extension agent, who's had some different health challenges over time and ultimately ended up retiring earlier this year. So this is now a group that doesn't have a convener. And so based on the fact that there's not really a home for this group anymore within Pinellas County Extension, but we have had partners continue to express that there's value to having a climate science advisory panel and to updating the regional projection of sea level rise for the Tampa Bay area. We've sort of basically trying to see if we can provide some clarity and direction in terms of the governance of this group and how it fits into the overall picture. So in speaking to some of those folks who have specifically asked me about this and if we're going to produce an updated sea level rise report, what we've talked about is that we think that this makes sense to take this group and not convene it under Pinellas County anymore, but convene it as a subcommittee of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Technical Advisory Committee. We think that's appropriate because climate change is one of the major actions in our comprehensive conservation and management plan. And we are the honest broker. We are a science-based organization, and we think that we can provide the kinds kinds of convening and facilitation is needed to have a group like this continue to persist in the region. We are active within the Regional Resilience Coalition, and so we're sure that we can take those findings and incorporate them in the efforts of the Resiliency Coalition. And so that's sort of what we're putting to you all. I've heard it from some folks, but we haven't formally brought it into the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Committee structure. And so this item is basically to get your thoughts about whether or not you all think it's appropriate to convene the Climate Science Advisory Panel as a subcommittee of the Technical Advisory Committee, and whether or not you think it's appropriate for that group or some other to then update the regional projection of sea level rise in the Tampa Bay area. So that's sort of a bit of the convoluted history and why we're here today. And, you know, we framed this as an action item, but I expect this to be something that you all maybe want to discuss and consider. And so I'd open it up there and answer any questions or, you know, talk amongst yourselves.
I'll start. It's great. I think it's a great asset for us to have regionally. I'm not sure if the estuary program is the appropriate location. I know you're obviously the appropriate person, but if the regional plan, just some of my thoughts, if the Regional Planning Council has the regional, you know, climate science client coalition, might be better to think about putting under that, under the Regional Planning Council, but that's just my open thoughts. As far as the local or regional specific studies and reports, is that in addition to the NOAA's projections? Because I know those NOAA projections are utilized for, you know, resiliency grants and federal grants and all this stuff. So is this
Correct.
in addition to that? Would this be a refinement of that?
It's a refinement. So it uses that's historically what the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel has recommended. They've taken the information that's in the sea level rise technical report, which some people call the NOAA numbers, but really it's an interagency report. And we take that, we connect it back to the local tide gauges, to the local conditions. And then we also make recommendations based on narrowing which curves are appropriate for which kinds of planning scenarios, because really the range of the amount of sea level rise that one could plan for if you span the high to the low is quite substantial, and in many cases not meaningful, certainly not to a lay public audience, and really not for a lot of planning applications as well. So we try and narrow down the application of specific curves, and then we regionally correct to the tide gauges here locally.
And, you know, for the other municipalities here, you're applying for resiliency grants and vulnerability analysis, Hillsborough County, City of Tampa, Pinellas County.
We are required to have locally adjusted numbers per our grants with DEP.
What'd you say?
I'll throw myself, I mean, I was one of the people who reached out to Maya because we have a vulnerability assessment phase 2 going forward, which is an update based on the laws that have changed in the state of Florida to be eligible for Resiliency Florida money. And then the changes that just were adopted again this year, plus the state asked us to step in and help 10 of our cities complete their vulnerability assessments, some of the smaller cities. And it is very specifically in the state's scope of work that we are required to use locally adjusted numbers.
Okay, good.
So without this, we're right now, you know, we're kind of in a pause because we don't have those locally adjusted numbers based on the most recent data. And without, you know, the Sea Grant agent who had kind of convened us all, there really isn't someone stepping in. And this is a very technical, this is where, I mean, the Regional Planning Council's taken a, you know, it's very planning oriented. This is detailed scientists, engineers, you know, in the weeds there. And so that's why, you know, I kind of reached out to Maya and said, is this something that you guys could help us with? Because one, we need it to get our vulnerability assessment back on track. And I think there are others, if you have applied for money to do a vulnerability assessment, you have those requirements too. Everybody does. So we need it quickly. And a lot of the members of the CSAP are either in this room now or part of the technical advisory committee already. So they're already our partners and have a history in it, and we could probably spin it up pretty quickly.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I see value in that if it helps with local planning, obviously, but also helps with the federal dollars and state dollars. You know, we're doing a vulnerability analysis. I'm sure most cities and counties are.
I'm not interested in convening another committee.
I know she's not.
Really only if it's going to provide a value to you all as our member governments. That's sort of why I would do this sort of thing, because like you said, there are a whole lot of tools out there. But like Kelly said, I think what's happening is in the absence of that, people are either putting these projects on hold or they're just picking a curve or picking a number, and they're sort of, you know, going it alone, and you don't know how that then is going to sort of patchwork all together, you know, what somebody plans for and what we experience. You know, we could be planning for wildly different things, but experiencing pretty much the same thing. And that creates like a problem in terms of the communities that we're doing this work for.
Is the, just this isn't my area of expertise, but is the NOAA, quote unquote, the NOAA projection, the current version, is that just a statewide thing? Is that a regional?
No, the NOAA projections are, so they're produced for the entire nation. And then what they do is they do break them out by different regions. And this is another issue that it might be beneficial to have someone like a climate science advisory panel in, because for this latest NOAA technical report that's now out there, we've been lumped in. Well, different parts of the state have been lumped into different regions, first of all. So for our area, we've been lumped in with the whole entire Gulf of Mexico region. And if you follow these kinds of things, you'll notice that what happens on the Western Gulf is actually very different than what happens on the Eastern Gulf of Mexico in terms of the rate of sea level rise, because of different kinds of activities related to water and natural and gas extraction and subsidence kinds of issues. So our numbers now from the national report, there are many scientists who believe that those maybe what's in this most updated report are not the most appropriate. That was part of the genesis behind creating a statewide projections of sea level rise in the Florida Flood Hub. So that group has actually produced a statewide report on sea level rise projections that addresses some of those issues. Unfortunately, it's under embargo and no one has been able to review that report. It's been completed for over a year at this point. So there are issues with what the state is going to recommend, with what the feds recommend, and there's value, I think, in having a local intermediary to try to figure out what is most appropriate from each of those reports, given the local site-specific conditions that we observe here in the Tampa Bay region. And I'll say that's a lesson learned from the estuary program and how we've dealt with things like nutrient pollution as well. When we do come together with a strong evidence-based foundation and we are able to speak with one voice, when politicians who become more and more active in these spaces and apply things like different regulatory pressures, we're able to have a response and, you know, continue on a path, and we all have a defense on why this is the appropriate path and way to work together, rather than chasing a new number every couple of years. So that's another thing. It provides some consistency and continuity if we're able to get to that point where we have the discipline to stay together, much like we've done for things like nitrogen pollution. Sarah?
So totally support this. Clearwater needs help, so yes. I am curious about funding. Like, there's probably a lot more things that need to go in this than these 2 bullet points. Like, do you think you'll be asking for specific funding from the partners or grants, or how?
No, I view this as a committee just like any other. So it's part of our work is to convene the region. And so if you ask us to convene the region on this topic, I think we will build that in. And the folks that are participating are doing so as part of, you know, their, you know, existing job responsibilities as well. You know, I don't foresee us doing original science. If that evolves, that's something that I think we would take forward to this group. And I would imagine that that's something that we would be seeking grant funding for, not necessarily from y'all as funders of our program, as local funders of our program, but probably from like larger federal kinds of calls. Yeah, so I think it's kind of like see how it goes, but the one clear need is really just to kind of read all the reports, stay up to date on it, and see what we can agree on, so that we can break it down for you in a way where you can read, a 1 to 4 pager and know what numbers you need to put in your vulnerability assessments, in your comp plans, things like that. I think of it as like pretty simple and not requiring additional funding.
And just to add to that, if the advisory panel's mission or objectives evolve through time, there's opportunity to program some funding into our work plan to address that. There's, some indicator development that through the Regional Resiliency Coalition, I think the Science Advisory Panel would be great at sort of making those recommendations vetted from the scientific community and then forwarding them onto the coalition. So if those tasks evolve through time, we could program it into our normal funding.
And those indicators are actually the thing that we've met on most recently as a panel to make a recommendation for the Regional Resiliency Action Plan, what drivers of climate change, what indicators of climate change we ought to be looking at, what are the appropriate data sources. And then again, a lot of this work is being advanced like in an entrepreneurial spirit and not in like a formalized, we've all committed to, we want this. And so Marcus is developing some of those climate change indicators that were identified by the Climate Science Advisory Panel and included in the Regional Resiliency Action Plan. But he's kind of working to advance that now. This just kind of gives it all a logical home and connection back, I think.
And just, last week, the Water Management District reached out to me about, as they had applied for some Resilient Florida dollars to maybe look at the Tarpon Outfall Canal, the structure, and they were deemed ineligible because they didn't have a vulnerability assessment. So they wanted to make sure that, even though, they didn't know at the time, we had included their structure in phase 1 because we did a county-wide. So we're gonna, in our update, we're going to make sure that it's very specifically highlighted in there so that they have that data to submit with an application to take a look at that structure on that canal. So it's really important that we all, at least if you're going to go after funding, that we're following the DEP checklist, which is on their website. And, this is a key component. It's mentioned like 2 or 3 times in the checklist that you need to use locally adjusted numbers.
So just one more follow-up, and I'm supportive of this as well, but how do we make sure that this committee isn't duplicating efforts that are being done by the Florida Flood Hub, right? So it's just, we don't just create one more report, one more number.
These are my concerns. This is why I've sort of slow walked the Climate Science Advisory Panel, given like all of the changes in the landscape. The convener of the Florida Flood Hub Sea Level Rise Working Group is actually one of the members of the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel. But I also just want to be like very candid with y'all, because you know me, that's how I am. Part of the reason this report has been embargoed for so long is because there's some pretty severe disagreements between the state and that state report and the federal numbers that are out there, and some of the federal members who sit on that working group as well. So we don't know what all of those disagreements might be, but I don't think we're going to reproduce that same exact statewide report for the Tampa Bay region just based on the makeup of who's in the Climate Science Advisory Panel, because it has those federal interests in addition to having the state interests and the local interests and the private sector. So again, it's kind of what we do here at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, convening public, private sector, all of the different levels and finding that consensus point. So I think it's very unlikely that a local report would just be the same as what comes from the statewide report.
Yeah, I guess that's some of the concern from management board member who has to explain this stuff to my board and the maritime industry and people that really are more concerned about moving ships and making money than this kind of stuff. But so I guess that would be my concern, just putting on the record that we do end up with a third report, right? You might have a federal this, you might have a state this, you might have a technical advisory this. That's fuel for some people to say that the numbers are all over the place.
I 100% agree with you. What I'll say is I think that the way that the climate science advisory panel has worked has not been to put out a wildly different number, but it's to incorporate all of those different sources that are out there and then just sort of narrow down this is the range of all of these different sources that is most appropriate. So I think it basically confirms those existing reports that are out there, but it provides like a more directed slice of guidance within those. So I don't think we would be recommending anything that is not consistent with. It would just be more specific than.
And to Maya's point, she articulated it well. You run sort of a comparison to the nutrient TMDLs that have been developed in the Bay in the past. There's a federally recognized TMDL for Tampa Bay. The state does not recognize a TMDL, but the Reasonable Assurance Plan. We have been working several decades to bring consensus around the issue and what's the most appropriate sort of management target that needs to be developed for nutrients. And it's the same for these sort of climate change questions within the region as well. We're looking to bring consensus within the regional collective, the experts within our region of what's best for us to move collectively forward with.
And I mean, obviously I'm a scientist, so that is that's for me, my most important aspect is that it be as technically corrected as it can be. But from the perspective of communicating it to somebody who has a different interest, local governments are going after money to do very important projects, and the state of Florida requires us to use locally adjusted numbers. So we're producing a locally adjusted report so that we can meet that state requirement. Adopted by, the Florida legislature and signed by the governor. So
when available, right?
no, we're required to, not when available. You're required to. If you get a grant from DEP, you're required to.
And to give some clarity to that, it's no different than any other guidance we do. Because in any other professional engineer, anything we do, there's a federal guideline in anything, then there's always a state guideline, and then it's always normalized within either a county or jurisdiction. In this situation, there's no consensus across all the different jurisdictions. So that's why in the situation like the estuary program, where you can have multiple interpretations across multiple jurisdictions, we're asking for consistency. So I will look at it in the same hierarchy as federal guidance, state guidance. Then, in our world, we'll look at federal, like FHWA, unruly's, MUTCD, and the state puts out the state SSRBC standards, and then we adopt our specific standards for county or local jurisdictions. So it's same hierarchy. With context, I fully support this, but one thing I would like to ask is, and Kelly, just thoughts, because there's always inconsistency of the planning horizon of a service life of an asset. If as part of the recommendations as it comes out of this committee to include, okay, if your service life of the asset is if this is your planning horizon, this is almost like a matrix for the recommendation.
We do include that in the existing report. I agree that that's a useful component, because one of the other things that changes when the elected officials pass laws is they change the planning horizons on you.
They just
which
did again.
They did with the slip rule, right? So.
Yeah. So yeah, we have to, I realize that, there's how we would do it if we were scientists, and then there's how we need to do it just to move our vulnerability assessments forward so that we can be eligible for funding. The state has told us what the planning horizons are. These are the ones that we will run, and that we will use locally adjusted data to do that. So they're giving us very prescriptive checkboxes that we have to check in order for them to approve our vulnerability assessment to say it's compliant with the statute. So, and the other thing about the actual report that comes out of this is you don't see anything in there prescribing, do this, do this, do this. It's recommendations And then you really have to use your own professional judgment to decide what you're going to ultimately do. So I think, at least the latest version of the report that we have online, there's nothing prescriptive in it. It's all just, here's recommendations based on the available information.
The main prescriptive part is that it's not appropriate to use that low curve. That's the major prescriptive thing in there.
But I mean, we just like right now I've spent way more time on the phone with Wes Brooks trying to move these vulnerability assessments forward and get to a consensus on what was approved last year with what was approved this year, and being caught in between the rule change and getting that all addressed, which we have now. But the planning horizon has been changed. The locally adjusted requirement is in there 3 different times. Your modeling, your adaptation area, your infrastructure adaptation stuff, and one other thing. So bottom line is, if you've applied for Resilient Florida money to do a vulnerability assessment, you need this. Or if you're going to, you need this. So
Kelly, to compliment you on that is that it is just good to have that consistency across jurisdictions, because when we handle projects and implement projects, we always ask, okay, well, what's that other agency doing, or what's this other agency? So just narrowing that is going to be so much more beneficial, and be able to be more responsive on how we implement our projects.
And I think that was one of the goals of DEP when they put together this program and created their vulnerability assessment scope, if you will, model scope of work with, and all of the tasks, is that if we're all at least at a minimum performing that scope of work and that data that consistently, then across the state we're more consistent too. So, yeah.
Question on, just to clarify the process, would this report need any higher level approval, or it's just a report issued with guidance recommendations for local use? I just wouldn't want it to be produced and get stalled.
I don't think we've ever had it adopted, have we?
Well, we published it as a technical publication of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So the panel itself, there's a consensus to, with the final version. And then it's been presented elsewhere, but it hasn't been formally adopted. It's just been published in the Estuary Program technical publication library.
Would it be okay to ask that as the committee, whenever they make these, if it is, we move forward with formalizing this process, that once a recommendation is made, they provide it to the management board so that we can all take it back as our agenda notes. It's upfront for us.
Yeah, I do think this is an important point to discuss and to get direction from you all. I know during when we were authoring the memorandum of understanding there's a management and planning committee for the Regional Resiliency Coalition. This was the point of discussion about what to do with CSAP and whether or not CSAP should be sort of like an independent organization off on its own, or if it should have to be like nested and go through an approval process by elected officials. So there was a desire expressed at that time with that audience to leave the Climate Science Advisory Panel as an independent panel that makes a recommendation. The recommendation is broad enough that, like Kelly said, you're choosing, you're using your professional judgment to select a curve and apply it to a particular engineering or planning challenge, but that it's not going all the way through like the steering committee level of the Regional Resiliency Coalition. I think we would be more than happy to present those results to the management board, to the policy board, to the Regional Resiliency Coalition. We've done that in the past. I think my question to you is, do you have an expectation of a formal approval or just a presentation of?
I think just a presentation.
I agree with Rajesh.
Maybe.
So just a couple questions, and more on the process. I think generally I'm supportive of the reports and this information, and obviously if it's a needed report to apply for funding, it seems making sure that it's living on is important. It's more my questions are more on the process side. So Kelly, to your point with the previous reports, you're not able to use those because NOAA has put out new numbers. Is that that's the change in the requirement?
No, the ICS has subsequently put out a new report, and then NOAA put out their version of that report. So we're not caught up.
So you couldn't use the previous versions, which is why it makes this so critical. Is that?
Yeah, it's just not updated. We're still on NOAA 2017, and now there's NOAA 2022. So that's all. It's just we're not.
So to apply for the grant money from the state, you're saying you're required to do local projections. So is that done by an engineering firm or an independent environmental firm at this point?
No, we're like other areas of the state.
What do you utilize now for your application to satisfy that requirement? Because we got approval for a vulnerability analysis.
We're waiting.
So who's doing that we're finding?
We're trying to the CSAP.
I mean, I think what Kelly's pushing for is for.
I understand that this could be used for that, but what is the region doing currently to apply for those grants?
On vulnerability assessment phase 1, we utilized the previous CSAP report as the locally adjusted recommendations.
So you're saying all vulnerability analysis applications are on hold, waiting for this group to produce is that what you're saying?
I think some are generating their own
right.
locally corrected projections. And that just puts us back into this trap that we discussed about a decade ago. And I think Kelly's trying to encourage the region not to go it alone, but instead to work together to develop these locally corrected.
I can speak a little about that. I know a lot of consultant companies are being hired to do these vulnerability assessments across the region. And now communities are outsourcing that choice to the consultants who granted have a lot of engineering backgrounds and they've done a lot of vulnerability assessments, but they're making the choices on which gauges to use and things like that. And so that they comply with the statute, the Florida statutes.
That helps clarify it for me.
And what we've seen when some of that information is presented, sometimes the consultants will choose to do things like average multiple curves together, which is not appropriate. If you understand the way that the modeling is done to develop a curve, they are tied to specific scenarios and variables and policy choices. So averaging them together is not something that, I don't think any scientist or folks around that are active in the space would recommend. So that's like why it's useful to have sort of a standard to which a consultant could judge. Again, like there's flexibility in terms of which curve you might choose, but you don't just get to make up a new curve.
Again, it's looking at the best available science and coming up with consensus and speaking with one voice for the region. So there isn't a mismatch of different planning numbers that each of the municipalities within our region are working towards. And that, again, creates a collective that hopefully makes us more competitive for those dollars in the future as well.
So I'm supportive of this, and Hillsborough County is doing a second vulnerability assessment effort right now. So I think this would be very useful and helpful. And I think it's good for our region. The question I have though is who from the Tampa Bay region is on that statewide working group?
On the Florida Flood Hub working group? So Dr. Gary Mitchum from the University of South Florida is the one who convenes it. And then there are a couple of folks from federal agencies that also sit on the committee. I think USGS, I think Davina sits on it.
That's okay. I'm just curious.
It is a statewide group though, and I think Dr. Mitchum is really like our local expert. He's convening it and he is on the panel. So,
Question, when you were talking about the inappropriateness of combining or averaging curves, you said something that caught my ear. You said part of it was policy. when you're developing these curves. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so sea level rise projections are in a way imagining possible futures. And so in order to imagine that possible future, you have to take into account the factors that are responsible for increasing sea level or sea levels, whatever. And one of those things that is a contributor there is the policy choices that we make with respect to things like greenhouse gas emissions. And so some of the curves are related to potential futures where we pass and implement policies where we either get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions, or we stay on a similar trajectory to what we are now, or somewhere in between. There are these different shared socioeconomic pathways that are built into those models. And so if you are just merging them all together, it's sort of like merging together the Spider-Verse, right? That doesn't work out. That's not what this is. It is imagining certain conditions.
We got that recorded. Suerte some marvel.
Marvel. So I thought that's what you were going to say. And this is my follow-up question. If you had a TAC or a subcommittee to the TAC developing a regional recommendation on how to translate national predictions that may or may not be appropriate given where you are on the map, and you have policy baked into that, and you've got a different county commission here and a different county commission, how would you account for that?
So in the past, what the Climate Science Advisory Panel has done has looked at those curves that have the most likely probability of occurring. So those curves, that can mean that they're representing multiple curves, which includes multiple policy features or potentials. And then we're also looking at, part of the reason they made a recommendation about the low curve was because the likelihood of exceeding the low curve was above 95%. And so that's, we have high confidence that the low value is going to happen, but we also have high confidence that higher than the low curve is going to happen. And we could pair that with information that's collected from satellite altimeters that basically say the observations, so not the models, but the observations of sea level that we're observing are not able to corroborate the low curve, even like in the years between when the original projections were there. So I think what you see out of the Climate Science Advisory Panel is what you see with scientists often is they tend to be conservative in how they approach these things. They're looking for the most likely kind of outcomes and then the range within that. Those observations or both the models and the observations and the selections that the Climate Science Advisory Panel have chosen in the past have also been tied towards the observations related to greenhouse gases and which shared socioeconomic pathway it looks like we're on. So at the time when we put out the 2019 report based on the 2017 NOAA sea level numbers, I'm sorry, because it is just like mixing all the things. The shared socioeconomic pathways that the IPCC puts out were not released at that time, but we could look at, they had these different representative concentration pathways. So the policy outcomes that are tied to particular concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And they were looking to see like, well, what curve, which greenhouse gas emission scenarios does it look like we're most likely on? And again, they made a comment that if we're not seeing, until such time as we observe policies that are designed to reduce emissions, you should be planning for that 6.5 scenario or the 8.5 scenario. I don't think we would make that same recommendation today based on what we're observing with greenhouse gas emissions. I don't think that 8.5 scenario, that high emissions business as usual, is true to what we're seeing in terms of like the policies that have been adopted. So I think we're trying to truth check to what the policy landscape actually is and not forecast out what it ought to be or, what it might be. We're just sort of like revising those recommendations based on the actual observations.
Okay, and maybe this is the intent. This is my last comment. instead of, and this is not my area by any means, and Kelly, sounds like she has a real need.
Kelly's helped me write this report.
Yeah. But I guess what I want to get at it is maybe just kind of a suggestion is maybe it would be better if we all agree that this is something that should happen and endorse this to move forward, that those recommendations would be recommendations on how to do the work, but not the numbers.
That's exactly
You know
how
what I'm
it's,
saying?
that's exactly how it's written now, and I don't see that that would change. I agree. I think,
Okay.
you know this better than a lot of folks in the room. The reason the Nitrogen Management Consortium is successful is because we don't tell you how you make your nitrogen load allocation, right? We let you do it based on your professional judgment because you know your operations, you know your facilities better than anybody else. We just know what the bay can handle.
All right, get out of my brain. That's where I went at the
No,
beginning.
that's exactly the philosophy that we've brought to this kind of process as well. There's a lot of lessons learned and knowledge transfer that can happen between how we manage and how we communicate about nitrogen pollution and how we address climate change at a local and regional scale. So I think, I hope that we continue to kind of make those linkages together. Yeah.
And we fully, I remember when Maya, Libby, and I took the report to the very beginning of the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition, before it was even a coalition. It was a group of policymakers who wanted to create the group. And this isn't forcing anybody to do anything. You don't have to use the report if you don't want to, although if you're going to apply for grants and that require you to use it, then you got to at least take it into consideration. But for those that do use it, it has a very broad application. We're required by county policy to conduct sea level rise and storm surge impact analysis on every capital project over $1 million, every piece of what's considered critical infrastructure. Or if it's in our county vulnerability zone, which is essentially our coastal high hazard zone and 100-year floodplain. So we're required by county policy to do that. I like to use this guidance to inform that process so that we're not just throwing a dart at the wall and hoping we're in the right place. But that's not what every local government is doing. It's not what every county is doing. But this does, I will say, to be able to slap this on, for lack of a better term, in Spidey world, slap this on to our vulnerability assessment and say, this is the locally adjusted number guidance document that we use to support development of that. I know that DEP will support it. I know we'll get that stamp of approval from the resiliency team.
So going back to the procedure, again, supportive of this, the need is there to have the report come out. So is the intent of putting it under the technical advisory committee as a subcommittee, as opposed to, because I had the same thought of, this sounds like the regional planning council, you're talking about legislation, you're talking about policy that's been put into place. And does that give the flexibility to then create a document that doesn't need approval? Or, I'm just trying to understand. I have that same sentiment of another subcommittee.
I know.
The need is there, obviously. And so to go back and then say, this is another time commitment that we'll have to, if we weren't already, which talking to some of the folks at the district, that nobody had heard of this.
John Ferguson sits on.
Oh, okay, yeah, so outside of our division or our bureau. So, to come back and then say, we're probably going to have additional folks on this committee committed to it. So anyway, that was my thought is, why is it under the TAC? And do we have the right people there? Are they going to know the policy side of it? How is that going to work? Or is there another, like the Regional Planning Council or some other entity that it's more appropriate under? Because Anellis did a phenomenal job of supporting it in the beginning for the whole region. And with that retirement, we have to relook at it and see where does it go? And I think that's what you're asking.
That's the question.
Yeah, right.
And there's not, there is my understanding, they're still recruiting for the replacement of that position. I'm not sure. JP hasn't said anything about filling it. And it's not saying that whoever they put in there might not help, because the Sea Grant agent serves the whole area here. They get somebody in there that has that background, that maybe they do become the convener again. But right now, we just don't have a convener, and that's, and one.
Yeah, and I don't
It's
swoop
a
in
very
and call the committee mine.
science-oriented
It's not
topic.
mine, so.
We tried, I appreciate, the regional planning councils had a lot of different working groups under, initially when the whole effort got out, but the real technical working groups just didn't seem to fit as well there. The people who are just doing the engineering and the science, and it really just, it failed for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it didn't flourish.
Now, for suggestion based on the conversation that we're all having, I'm not sure it's probably appropriate as a subcommittee of the Technical Advisory Committee, but I view it as potentially now an ad hoc, panel that we could convene as necessary program similar to the consortium. So it wouldn't be operating under the auspices of the TAC, but we would be facilitating it much like we do the Nitrogen Management Consortium. And for the time being, the estuary program is more than happy to be a co-facilitator of that panel, and the primary facilitator of that panel. And if things evolve with other membership or development of co-chairs at that time, we could explore opportunities to, co-facilitate with other entities.
Yeah, I think that sounds right, because that would allow you to address the immediate need and then leaves the door open to maybe having some discussions with the regional planning council and other entities about where clearly there's a long-term need as well, but where it's best placed kind of in the regional framework.
I think it also offers sort of that sense of independence that I'm also hearing in terms of not being housed under the estuary programs TAC.
Yeah.
Two additional comments. I'm supportive of reconvening the panel. I just want to make sure that this, if you move your go-to meeting real fast, because it looks like this recommendation is to recommend that the panel update the recommended projections. Where you just said that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is just giving the project-specific recommendations, but that seems to hear like that you would be recommending the projection.
That's the name of the report. That's the name of the report that has been put out twice. So it's to update that report.
In a sense, it's updating from the 2017 projections to the more current scientific information from both NOAA and the Florida Flood Hub.
May want to add that then, just to recommend that they update the report of recommended project projection of sea level rise. Right.
Can't edit because I'm not signed in, but I will add the word report at the end of that sentence. It's just the title of the report, that's fine.
Just a comment.
Noted. I can make that change.
Any additional discussion? Very good discussion. So the first one, I guess, is we have a change in the first recommended action. So I just want to clarify the change in the actual recommendation. So recommend the policy board authorize the Tampa Bay Estuary Program to convene the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel as an ad hoc working group. Is that correct?
Yeah, something along those lines. I'd say to convene the ad hoc Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel. Just leave it at that.
This is just a clarification. This is a recommendation to the policy board.
So,
You combine those, Kelly, and just say, just what you said, convene the advisory panel as an ad hoc working group for the purpose of updating the report, recommended projection of sea level rise for Tampa Bay. So it has a kind of narrow mandate while everybody decides more broadly across different groups where this committee would sit.
I think I heard that there was also a potential, like the intent to maybe broaden what this group does, not limit it to the report and sea level rise. And
Understood, but I think what we were talking about is like the immediate need of having these localized projections for applications for various programs.
Right, but if you tie them into one, I think you kind of limit the scope of what this group has been approved to do. Like that's the sole reason we're doing it. I don't see the harm in keeping them separate. And
the science does inform the CCMP and the Habitat Master Plan and other things too. I don't know how you guys feel about, that component of it, Ed, Maya.
We're going to use the best available science no matter what committee, where it falls in the committee structure.
But I do think that this has been one of the struggles with the Regional Resiliency Coalition is some of the lack of formality in the governance structures. And I think that the Regional Planning Council has been working to provide some of that structure. And so creating an ad hoc committee that may or may not be affiliated with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, of which I'm a facilitator, and how all of those things feed together. I don't think this is resolving like some of the questions about, certainty and governance and how we want to do all of these things. So as the person who would be charged with doing this, I'm not really sure what y'all want or don't want, other than update a report.
It kind of brings up another item, and I agree with you. I think having two separate things, like create the panel and then produce an update on the report. I agree, two separate things. But I'm just wondering if maybe this should be, and I'm not going after the Regional Planning Council, but maybe a request like this should be coming out of the Regional Planning Council.
But it's not, so that's why,
Right.
that's why we're here.
Right. I understand. And
I say that as a friendly participant in the Regional Resiliency Coalition, the way that the governance structure there too, that would be like the policy board being the ones to ask for a technical report or project or something like that. Because, right, it's going to go up through your steering committee that's primarily elected officials. I don't know that that's like I think there's a relationship there, but that's not the intended audience of this report. So that's not the people that are feeling the pain point and the value that the committee provides. So I think that's why it's not coming in that direction. But yeah, it would be nice if that is how it
Been a
works.
discussion within that group saying we need a local scientific committee, technical advisory committee to look at local projections for, if the Regional Planning Council is made up of all the counties and cities, right? Is there not through the Regional Planning Council big board, but through the coalition, is there a call for this? I believe there's a need for it. I think it'll be useful, especially
I think
for.
that my only concern there would be that, we have an immediate need. We've been literally been on hold for months now because, well, first, with the new bill that just came out this year, DEP was not sure what it did. Like a lot of us were right in the middle or completing modeling, and then new requirements came out. So do they grandfather us in or what do they do? So those issues needed to get resolved. This one can be resolved, but to have to go up through all of our elected officials in order to push that down to then push it out seems like, I don't know. I don't know that it's a really good use of. I can go to my commissioner and say, I need this, and then have him, but again, this is a technical report. It's not, the bottom line is if your policymakers say we're not using that report, that is their right to do so. But, for those of us kind of in limbo land right now, trying to move our vulnerability assessments forward with the state,
You know, we've been leading from behind on this since 2013. And so this is my attempt to force it into something where we're not asking staff level folks to sort of go out on a limb to push us in a direction of working together. If we're not in a different place, that's okay, I accept it, because I think we can still produce the report and not have some of the certainty around there. But it's been a decade, I guess. And so do we still need to lead from behind, or can we do this a little bit differently? That's sort of the question.
Did I hear you right in that there's, with Ed's recommendation about an ad hoc committee, that there's concerns with setting it up that way? I wasn't clear.
I am willing to accept any of these. My concern with it being an ad hoc committee with the remainder of that conversation, which is that anybody else could then come up and take it on and be the convener of it, puts us, I think, in the same kind of situation where, you know, if my capacity is tapped and it's not a clear responsibility of mine, or if somebody else takes it over and then they change jobs or something else happens again, then where does the home for it? Who's responsible? We kind of like stay in the same kind of limbo, which is frankly where it's been right now. It's been a year since we've met, because I didn't want to take over somebody's committee. I'm honestly not begging for committee work.
So could we set it up then that as a co-chair, one of them being the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, so that we set it up so that, yes, it is part of, as long as it's forming, as long as it's together, that the Estuary Program.
I like the idea of it being like an ad hoc group, like the Nitrogen Management Consortium, that's convened by the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Understand that there can be co-facilitators from other organizations in the region. Sorry, go ahead, Alana.
I was gonna say, I think we're happy to co-facilitate, and you have had plenty of discussions about the need to reconvene this group. It's just, even before our coalition was formed, there's always the CSAP that took this matter on. And so we've been really waiting for the CSAP to be reconvened, and we weren't at the time the ones that did that. And so I think, again, it's like the same issue of like, okay, yeah, we could take on one other committee, but if the estuary program, I think if you guys want to really take the charge and start hosting those, I think we would absolutely be willing to be a co-facilitator in this, because it's very relevant to both of our work. And I think it's not off the table if needed at home in the future. I think we could figure something out.
Yeah, my recommendation is very akin to the Nitrogen Management Consortium. We're not going to drop facilitating the consortium and leave it homeless, and recognize that there could be co-facilitators and co-chairs along the way as that panel evolves. That's the way I'm doing it.
It's a level of consistency up here, an umbrella that we can count on.
Maya, what would be a clearer recommendation? Give you more comfort.
I don't think that we're reconvening. I think this would be us convening for the first time, but I think I'm fine with this recommendation, the way that it's written. I don't have concern there. It was the rest of the conversation that, you know, and so then somebody else could take it over kind of thing.
Yeah, what we don't want to do is then the next ICS report and NOAA recommendations come out probably
like in a year.
January. And then we're sitting here having the same conversation again going, and then somebody else here in the room is going, I just applied for my DEP vulnerability assessment grant and I don't have locally derived numbers. Hello. So, you know, the idea is, I mean, obviously it is used for other things, but we're all going to get caught in this rabbit trail that we can't get out of if we don't keep, you know, it is an ad hoc group. We don't meet, we don't meet all the time. I mean, the first iteration of it, we had that storming and norming process because it was brand new. We had to come up with a name. We had to figure out who we were. We had to define our role. I still have all that.
And I was going to say, and we might do that again if we start to tackle some of these other issues. But if this is like the extent of it, you're right. I think we can churn out an updated report pretty quickly.
The last one was really more focused around updating the report, and then, you know, we haven't met. So, you know, if for now that's what we accomplish in the short term, I think, you know, at least it'll help with those who need it and, still allow for the additional conversations to move forward on a lot of other things.
And I do think it's important that the group is one that's service oriented. And so that's the only reason I brought this issue on this agenda is because I had multiple county and city government folks reach out to me and ask about it. And I think that would be the same with, the work going forward. We would only be producing a consensus report if the Regional Resiliency Coalition says like, hey, we need help with this climate phenomena or this part of the resiliency action plan. So I think we're trying to be responsive and service oriented, not like going out there and just like churning out reports for the sake of churning out reports.
We can make these recommendations to the policy board to let this go forward, but say something happens and it doesn't, like what stops the TAC from moving forward anyway? If you are.
Nothing really, but I think that these kinds of resilience questions have been ones that we've brought as matter of policy and direction for you all as the members of the estuary program. And so we've done that since definitely there was a policy statement on climate adaptation and climate change work that the estuary program does back in 2012. And so out of, I think, deference and respect to the desire of both this board as well as the policy board to weigh in on some of those things, I think before we formally take this on, like as part of a committee structure or something like that, then we would let you all weigh in on those because that's the kind of direction that we hope to get from you all. But I think you're right. We could just convene a subcommittee without going through this conversation.
Well, no, I mean, we go through the conversation and we make our recommendation, but we are not the end of this recommendation. So should it not get through the next round is what I'm saying. If there's an urgent need to have we can continue conversations later, but I mean, the start of the work can begin under the technical advisory. I'm the person that works around the.
I hear you. I guess what I've said is that I've been working around and leading from behind for a decade on this. And I have to put myself out on a limb on an issue that can be very contentious. And I would prefer to do that with the support of the boards. And if the policy board doesn't support us convening the Climate Science Advisory Panel and being the ones to sort of coordinate a consensus opinion on it, then I don't think we're the right home for this, even if there's a big need in the community. I think we would continue to participate and provide our expertise. But if the policy board doesn't buy in, I don't think it's us. And I don't have any evidence to suggest that they don't support this.
Imagine there would be similar conversation around reconvene the advisory panel. But a formal recommendation from the management board adds a lot of weight to them in their discussions next week.
So the way you changed it, you have it convening an ad hoc climate science advisory panel. To me, that sounds new and not like the. If it's a thing already.
Yeah, it's just that we didn't convene the group before.
Right.
So.
That's true, but we were still an ad hoc working group. I think.
I guess, are you trying to tie, do you want the continuity of this is the climate science advisory panel?
I defer to you all. If you're more comfortable with reconvene, that's fine.
No, I didn't say I just said the instead of and.
Oh, that's fine with me. The fun part.
So do we just want to recommend the policy board to authorize the Tampa Bay Estuary Program to convene the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Period? Convene it.
Sounds good.
Okay. We got A. Nobody's changing it. Okay. All right, and is everybody okay with B?
I still don't see the word report in there, just
Oh, yeah.
something that we talked about. I don't know if that's necessary or if that's the first request.
Maya, to close the loop on it, you mentioned, for a decade, we've been leading from behind. Just want to make sure, thinking through this is the ad hoc committee, and eventually we'll work towards planning of how that structure of that committee should be developed, correct? If it formally will continue to reside, so we're almost saying, okay, let's address the short-term need now. But we're still going to focus on, with the Regional Planning Council, how that overall structure shall be in the future. Would that be a recommendation coming out of this ad hoc committee?
It could be, if you had a formal recommendation for how that goes, like that the estuary program convenes the climate science advisory panel. And then you want to create a loop into, right now, the only loop is in the actual memorandum of understanding that connects it to the Regional Resiliency Coalition. Don't know that you have like an org chart.
So this way, Kelly, we could facilitate the short-term need and also focus on the big-term, the long-term picture, where would this committee formally reside in the future? Just a thought.
I think we're answering that question, though, that it will continue to be convened by the estuary program. But the question is, do we want to try and formalize beyond that memorandum of understanding a connection to the Regional Resiliency Coalition as well?
We have a C, almost. It's still working.
I'm coming out of the Spider-Verse right now, so.
This be developing a recommendation for the management board to determine or to approve the scope and I don't know how to say, like, where it fits in the structure of.
Yeah, I don't think that we want the CSAP to be the ones to develop the scope of tasks, because like I said, I think we want it to be a service-oriented organization. But so we want those scopes, those tasks to be initiated by members of the Regional Resiliency Coalition, or like we want to be. We want our recommendations to be wanted, to be desired. We don't want to just like put a recommendation out there that nobody's actually looking for.
Is there no way to just add that to A? The purpose of the panel? To be responsive, like.
Yeah, I think it's good to give it a scope, right?
Yeah.
Give it a
Yeah, like.
Purpose. Unless there's already one defined, Maya. Is there a previous?
Yeah, there is a mission
Mission
and a purpose statement, yep. But I think the loop isn't in CSAP defining itself. It's on the region figuring out how it wants to use CSAP. We haven't produced new reports because nobody's asked for them.
Yeah, I understand, but I mean, that would solve what you just said. If the management board recommended to the policy board to give it, reconfirm the mission statement or
Yeah.
or provide a mission statement.
Yeah, so.
So we have two.
Yeah, I'm not liking the language.
What if we just, to convene the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel and to be responsive towards future science-based recommendations. Recommendation needs identified by the region.
Well, no, grammatically that puts the responsive towards on the policy board. For the purpose of meeting needs identified by the region. Or
Doesn't it put the onus on the ESHRE program? Authorize the Tampa Bay ESHRE program to
Oh.
convene.
Right,
Not
then
the
it puts it on the SRI
Yeah.
program. You're right. Convene the Climate Science Advisory Panel.
And for the panel to be responsive?
A lot of words salad.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it was, maybe I'm putting too much in it. That's the reason why they're convening. To be responsive to the science-based recommendation needs identified by the region, like B is such a thing. That's a need identified by the region. But if you have an identified region, or if region is just kind of loosely defined as all those entities it serves versus a certain specific body.
We just, maybe I think she was suggesting take out towards the future and just say two science-based recommendation needs identified by the region. Make it simple. Is that better?
Yes. Leanne's still thinking.
Well, I mean, I'm fine with it. I would take out and for the panel. I'm like, I think it's one thing, but I can live with either.
Simple is better.
Take out and.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Everybody take a quick peek at that, see if we're where we want to be.
So this kind of says to be responsive to science-based recommendations.
No, recommendation needs.
About, I'm just throwing it out there, one last thing, to provide science-based recommendations rather than to be responsive to. It just
Yeah.
sounds kind of weird to me.
Provide.
Provide science-based recommendations for
Regional needs.
As
To me,
identified,
regional-
as identified by the region.
As identified by.
Is everybody feeling good? Feel comfortable taking a vote?
I can vote on it. I still don't like it, but I can vote on it.
We can wordsmith it grammatically, but are like, this is generally the
Yes.
intent, I think.
Okay. We have two recommendations here, so we'll go ahead and vote on each one since they've been changed. So the first one, A, recommend the policy board authorize the Tampa Bay Estuary Program to convene the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel to provide science-based recommendations as identified by the region. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Anything else at this time? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. B, recommend the policy board request the Climate Science Advisory Panel update the 2019 recommended projection of sea level rise for the Tampa Bay region report. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Yay.
When's the last time we had one like that?
Every
time I get up there.
Maya is official. Okay, well, give Maya some breathing space here. Okay, executive director and staff reports. Ed?
Yeah, just two updates and reminders. According to our bylaws, we hold elections for the management board chair and co-chair positions every 2 years, and that time frame is coming up again. We definitely appreciate both Kelly and Leanne's service as chair and co-chair respectively, and if they wish to continue, we would support that. But if there's other nominations, we would hear those at the August meeting and vote at that time for the next 2-year term. Also wanted to mention I did have opportunity to meet up in Washington, D.C. with other national estuary programs as part of our spring meeting. At that time, we were also able to meet with the local delegation of our congressional members up in Congress and through a lot of work by all the NEP directors throughout the nation. We got fairly significant support, bipartisan support for continued appropriations of the national estuary programs at the fully authorized level. So hopefully we'll see that reflected in our appropriations for next year's work plan. About 88 representatives signed on to an appropriation support letter for the national estuary programs through the work of a lot of the directors up there stomping around the Capitol during the times we were meeting with EPA. So I just wanted to bring those updates to hand. We also have a couple of staff updates. You can turn it over to Sheila to give you some updates on Give a Day and other experiential education projects that she's managing.
Well, thanks, Ed. So yeah, this summer, June and July is going to be a very busy couple months for us from a community engagement perspective. So June is kind of wrapping up our Give a Day season. So we have on May 28th, we have an oyster volcano developing oyster volcanoes at Philippi Park. Yeah, building. Thank you. So that's on Tuesday. It's sort of like a committee's focused Give a Day. So if you can be there, please join us. We'd love to have you.
Or if anyone from your staff is able to participate.
And then we have 2 other Give a Days down in Manatee County. We have a duet planting where we have 26,000 wiregrass plugs to plant. So please, if you're able, come out and support us.
She really needs help.
Because yeah, I really need help. So please come out for that. We provide food for all volunteers. And then we also have our annual World Oceans Day paddle cleanup. We'll be launching out of Bishop Harbor. This year we are going to be providing kayaks for folks that might not have the ability to provide their own vessels. So registration for all of those events are available. So you can either contact me directly or log on to our website to sign up for those. And then in July and August, we are hosting the bioluminescence paddles again in Old Tampa Bay to educate and communicate about pyridinium issues in Old Tampa Bay. Those last year were very popular and sold out very quickly. And I know there were some management conference members that wanted to participate in those. So I'm kind of giving you VIP access. So if you want to sign up for those, please contact me and I'll put you on my list. Registration won't go live until probably a week before the event, but just wanted to let you guys know that those are being planned.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but where are those going to depart from?
It will kind of depend on how the bloom sets up this summer, but it'll likely be from RE Olds and Oldsmar, or somewhere in Safety Harbor.
It's very possible the bloom doesn't set up this summer.
Yeah.
We haven't seen Pyrodinium yet this season, which is good news.
Hopefully that's the case, because last year we didn't see any Pyrodinium on our bioluminescent doors.
Let's provide your own.
We provide the kayaks for you for that one because it is a nighttime paddle. So we want to make sure that everybody has the right safety gear for those events.
Sheila, just going to give an update on where the Bay Mini grants are this year.
Yeah, so the Bay Mini Grant application period just opened last week. They're currently open now until September 13th is the deadline. You may have noticed we kind of expanded the application period to give people a little more time to prepare, start thinking about their projects that they want to apply for funding for. We have 2 informational webinars scheduled, one June 11th and one August 1st. They'll be the same information, so we're asking anyone interested in applying for the Bay Mini Grant to attend one of those. If you want to share those links, registration links, and any newsletters that you might have, that would be great. And I think that's it. For maintenance, quick reminder, they're up to $5,000. Nonprofits, schools, governments, and businesses are eligible to apply for these. Government entities do have like a little bit higher burden of community engagement, community involvement. It's more focused on funding nonprofits, businesses, and educational institutions, but y'all are eligible. If you have any questions or if y'all have any ideas for projects or anyone that comes to you with an idea and just wants to run it by us to see if it's eligible, feel free to send them my way.
It's just, and then one more update from Maya on the updated CCMP website.
It's not showing.
Tried to bring it up.
Well, I have that over there. I'm logged into the. I'm also logged into our WordPress.
Yeah.
Into the WordPress though. That's what I was trying to start with.
Our main WordPress you're talking about?
Yeah. Why doesn't it show up?
Is it on a tab that's in another screen that you could drag into?
Highlighted and my screen, it shows that it's showing. There's like gremlins in here. Take it back. So as you all know, over the past year or so, we went ahead and updated all of the comprehensive conservation management plan for Tampa Bay to include progress made since 2017 when we updated the latest version of the charting the course. And since you all approved that language, we've been working to create a new web interface. If you've interacted with the 2017 version of the CCMP, you know it's an Adobe eZine. That's pretty cool. It was better than like having a big thick printed version, but there were some challenges with like the searchability and some of the functionality and how to update all of that information. So there's really 2 elements to how the CCMP is is going to be presented here in the future. I think the thing that we're having a hard time showing you is we're still developing on our tbep.org space, basically a landing page for the CCMP. I'll just verbally describe to you what it looks like. Essentially, it has like a very high level overview of what the CCMP is, couple of sentences. It provides a clickable illustration where you can then dive into any of the various action plans that are in the CCMP. So you can see like this picture that kind of looks at, it's a visual representation of the Tampa Bay region, and you could click on something like a living shoreline or fish and wildlife, and then it jumps immediately into those action plans. And then it also summarizes the high level goals. So it follows this sort of colorway to help people navigate, so they know when they're in the clean waters and sediment actions versus the thriving habitats and abundant wildlife actions, or the informed, engaged, responsible community. What's on the tbep.org website is very visual and easy to sort of jump into a specific point of the CCMP. All of those links are driving you to this Quarto page that I'm forever indebted to Marcus and Sarah at Tangram, who helps us with some of the web developing work that we do for our website. She really helped with some of the styling, and Marcus got this into a framework which is consistent with our open science efforts. Ed, you can just sort of click through those three major tabs so you can see all of the actions that are nested within each of those those programmatic priorities. It makes it so that you're not sort of inundated with the literature review and background information, but you can expand it and dive down into it, but you don't necessarily get bogged down all that. You can skip down to the action, individual activities, and then they're all toggles, so you can expand to see which activities are associated with each action and action plan. So you can sort of like, it's cross-functional. You can find your way through the CCMP in a lot of different ways. Ed, can you click on the magnifying glass, the search function? Yeah, so right there you can type in things like, type in Pinellas County. You can see every time Pinellas County is listed somewhere in either an action as a responsible party or as someone who has made a contribution. So if you want to search to see relevant items in the CCMP that apply to you and your organization, it's much easier to do that. Or if you don't want to sort of like click through all the things and you don't know that you need to be in, BH1 versus BH6, you can just quick search it really fast, and it launches you pretty much anywhere you need to go in the CCMP. So we think this is a much more user-friendly kind of experience. You can also link specifically to all of those different levels. And then if you keep scrolling down, there's also some additional resources in there, like a list of all of the actions. Keep on the right where it says, yep, your mouse is almost on it. And it's end those acronyms, there you go. So you can see all of it at a glance. You can see everything that the CCMP is addressing. And then it also links to some of those companion documents that are required of us from EPA, things like our how we finance our work, so our funding strategy, our vulnerability assessments. Can you scroll down a little bit further, Ed? Yeah, so all of those complementary strategies, some of which we've recently updated and some of which we need to be working on updating, like the monitoring and indicators plan. But the research priorities is one that we updated as a result of this. This is the financing the plan. So just so you kind of know, we're working on rolling this out. Hope to have the whole thing, including the landing page on tbep.org, ready and live in the month of June. But please take a look. The link that's in your agenda packet is live to all of the Quarto base. So like the real actual content, the meat of the CCMP. So take a look and let us know what you think. We hope that it is a little bit more user-friendly for y'all.
Thanks, Mike. That was all for the staff reports.
Okay. The TAC report starts on page 18 of your packet, and we'll go into all of them, but see there's some new technical reports and peer-reviewed publications there, a new open science product, the Tidal Creeks dashboard. Adding to that one, just FYI, we're finally going to construction on the Roosevelt Channel 5 salinity barrier removal and restoration there. So Yahoo, when they're getting ready to remove the weir, if you want to go down there with a sledgehammer, let me know and take your chunk of it. There are 4 presentations and the links there, and then the committee meetings. As an FYI, the next TAC meeting is on June 26th, right here in this room, and you can also participate virtually, but we would like to see more faces in the room. And
It was the Pinellas County show the last time.
Yes, yes. And as I said before, I did not threaten anyone. It was not a performance evaluation criteria. It just, the room was, there was a lot of Pinellas County staff in there, so see that as a challenge, Mr. Glixberg.
Be out of town that week.
In Troy.
Get some more EPC staff over here too, or at least online. So again, if there's any questions about that, you can always reach out to myself or Ryan. And the other thing is Marcus is always interested in topics that the TAC wants to hear about. So if you have something you want to present, please, get it to Marcus so that we can consider it for the agenda. And I also just wanted to say thank you to Marcus for helping Alex and our team. We're getting ready to roll out our water quality dashboard in R, and it wouldn't have happened without Marcus's expertise. So we appreciate that.
The only presentation we have so far for the next TAC meeting is an update on the climate change indicators. So a lot of discussion about that today. So if you want to know what we're doing in way towards tracking status and trends of different things related to climate change, would love your feedback on that, whether we're tracking the correct things or not. Definitely show up to the TAC meeting and see that presentation.
And since we only have one presentation, if you have something that we all need to know about, this is a great forum. Community Advisory Committee report.
Hey, I'm Megan Blanchard. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Community Advisory Committee. This quarter, we had 2 meetings, including one at Moccasin Lake Restoration Site, and it was a really interesting event. We had a lot of past applicants and future applicants for the Bay Mini Grant come and hear a presentation about how they can make their application successful, and I got a lot of good feedback from participants of that. We also had a Golden Mangrove Review meeting, and we're really proud of our selected project winner, and we're presenting it next Friday at the policy board meeting. We're super excited, proud of them. CAC members volunteered 34.5 hours of their time. We're really grateful to them. There were 6 presentations with links here, 4 media interviews. How lucky. And 9 events, and we're completed 1 Bay Mini Grant, which is really good to see. And there's 27 ongoing. And like Jessica mentioned, we have the next application period coming, or that's open now, and will be ongoing over the summer. And that's it. Chair.
2 quick questions, or 1 question. Who's winning the award, or is it a secret?
You'll have to see.
Oh, okay.
You can tell them.
It's the stewards of our urban lakes.
Nice.
Yeah, for some of their work at Mirror Lake.
And I'd just like to thank the estuary program and staff, and Sheila especially, for working with us on the Great Fork Cleanup. On April 26th, we had the 4th annual Great Fork Cleanup in partnership with with Keep Tampa Bay Beautiful. And this year we broke records. We had over 1,000 volunteers and removed over 100,000 pounds of trash in about 2 hours from the mangroves, mainly around McCabe Bay. Ed was there, Maya was there, Sheila was there, a bunch of the other staff. So definitely appreciate it. It was a great success.
TBEP staffers pulled out a derelict boat, so we're really proud about that.
Carrie's not.
We survived. All right. We have a discussion item, the birds campaign.
Yeah, we're we're hoping that this will work. Blake is actually at a conference and he was going to present remotely. And if the audio is not coming through, we're going to probably have to forego the presentation. But he was going to give an update on some of the work he was doing in partnership with FWC and DEP on angler and pelican surveys that were being conducted on the Skyway fishing pier in relation to the new regulations that were implemented this past October. Blake, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Excellent. But we're not seeing your screen.
It's okay. I've just made the presenter. Okay, it should work now. Yes.
In the meeting.
Yep, we see your screen. You just got to put it into presenter mode now.
All right, can you see it?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Sorry I'm not there, everyone. I'm at the North American Social Marketing Conference up in Clearwater for the next 2 days. But we just wanted to give you all a sort of quick preview of some of the preliminary results from a project that we started last year looking into pelican entanglements on the South Skyway Pier to inform a new Hooked Birds campaign that we'll be launching in the next couple of years. So as many of you probably know already, pelican entanglements on fishing piers, especially the Skyway Pier, have been a really ongoing and contentious issue for some time now. And despite outreach and educational campaigns from FWC and other conservation groups, entanglements of brown pelicans continue to be a problem on the Skyway Pier. And in an effort to find a solution to this problem, FWC worked with stakeholders and held public meetings to get feedback on potential actions to take to reduce entanglements. And if you attended any of those events like I did, you probably noticed how passionate both the angler and pelican interest groups were about this issue. So it's a really contentious issue that's on all sides. Eventually, FWC did announce new fishing gear regulations that be in place on the pier. Includes a requirement that all anglers show proof of completing an online course on seabird entanglements and best fishing practices, a reduction in the maximum number of lines per angler from 3 to 2, and a new season of gear restrictions between November 15th and March 15th, in which anglers can't use fishing rigs with more than one hook attached or any multiple hook. And like any good regulation, it seems like, kind of nobody was happy with the decision afterwards. Anglers were mad that they couldn't, use their favorite gear for such a long period of time, and conservationists didn't think that the restrictions went far enough. So this really caught our attention here at TBEP because both FWC and DEP are partners to our interlocal agreement. We want to continue to support our partners' efforts for achieving a healthy and resilient Tampa Bay. And we want to do what we can to make their jobs easier. So we thought, okay, how might we be able to help them? Well, according to FWC, there were 3 sort of key components to those new fishing gear regulations. First is determining the effectiveness of the regulations themselves, needing a consistent and robust data collection over the next 2 years to be able to determine if the new regulations are having a measurable impact on entanglements. Second is exactly what that measurable effect is. So here the goal is a reduction in the likelihood and severity of entanglements. And the third is the desire to reach a resolution, between both of our key angler and conservation interest groups. So we're going to need data that can also reliably capture the pulse of angler support for these regulations, as well as how their perceptions may change over time as they actually experience those restrictions in real time. And this is where we can offer our support to help change attitudes and behaviors, which can ultimately increase support and compliance with the regulations. It will reduce then the frequency and severity of entanglements and ultimately increase the effectiveness of those regulations, spurring even more support once stakeholders can see that these changes are actually working. And we really see our value here as, being able to provide input and contributions and messages from an independent third-party messenger, right? So, it's not like FWC or DEP is sort of, coming out and making these kinds of research that can be really contentious to the public's ear. Instead, we're here as this independent, neutral party to really just bring the evidence and help communicate those needs in a more trusted way to those stakeholders. So we designed a study to estimate the effectiveness of fishing gear restrictions in reducing the rate of pelican entanglements at the South Skyway Pier. This will be the first phase of our larger Hook Birds campaign. First, we want to look at the trends in entanglements over approximately the next 2 years with baseline entanglement rates that we have from a previous study conducted by researchers at Eckerd College. We also want to be able to identify social and spatial temporal factors that increase the risk of pelican entanglements on the pier and estimate the number of anglers that are actually complying with the fishing gear restrictions. And last, to be able to monitor and support the design of an effective campaign at the end, we need to be able to track how anglers' perceptions of entanglement change over time and what demographic, socioeconomic, and psychosocial characteristics are associated with anglers' perceptions of potential solutions to the problem. Now, I'm just going to briefly go over the methods behind our project, but I'm happy to answer more questions afterwards and get into more of the nitty-gritty details. But basically, to get our pelican conditions and the entanglement risk factors on the pier, we did pelican surveys down the length of the pier. Here you can see the pelican data sheet where we collect the information about both pelicans and angler sightings on the pier at different locations. We separated the pier into these 5 sections that you see here and surveyed sections A through D. For each pelican that we spotted, we recorded their age, where they were spotted near the pier, and if applicable, how severe any entanglements were. We also put together this guide for how to determine the age of a pelican and how to assign severity scores to any entanglements. And here you can see that scores range from minor to severe, from just a hook being present but not actually affecting the bird, to entanglements that actually impede the bird's mobility or behavior or have resulted in really severe wounds. To get our data on angler perceptions and behaviors, we designed a 5-minute questionnaire for anglers to complete in person with me on the pier. And as an incentive, anglers who completed the questionnaire were given a free tackle box containing 100 circle hooks in 5 different sizes. Now, I was very pessimistic, about being able to find anglers who would be willing to talk to me. So our initial goal was just to get 100 questionnaires completed each year, with an equal number completed during the gear restriction season and during the off season. But little did I know that those anglers really ate our questionnaire up. We got 50 completions after just 2 weeks on the pier. They were really excited to talk to me and to share their opinions about the issue. And as soon as they heard they got a free tackle box out of it, I couldn't get them to stop talking and wanting to do more surveys. And so given this demand, we ended up tripling our sample size as well as our inventory of tackle boxes. So this is a fantastic, unexpected outcome and meant that we could really get a rich amount of data from these anglers on the pier. And here you can see exactly what that questionnaire looks like. Basically, it just contains questions about their general demographic characteristics, what they did on the pier that day, the types of gear they used, the pelicans that they observed, giving us some crowdsourced data, their perceptions of the pelican entanglement issue, their opinions on different solutions to this problem, and their perception specifically of those new pier restrictions. So in just these 3 pages, we can build a database that will allow us to identify the determinants of angler support, estimate compliance, and design a future behavior change campaign tailored to the attitudes and behaviors of real anglers using the pier to fish. So we initially designed a rigorous schedule over the next 2 years with the aim of achieving a well-balanced sample of comparable data before, during, and after the gear restriction season each year for both our pelican and our angler data sets. Unfortunately, though, this schedule didn't quite go as planned. So 3 weeks after FWC publicly announced the new regulations, we requested a permit from DEP in the beginning of August. We didn't hear back until a month later, which is when we were able to officially submit a permit and get it sent for review. Shortly after, EPA signed off on our project, and we decided to go ahead and begin our surveys a couple of weeks later after not hearing back from DEP regarding our permit. And we were just gonna, pay the park interest fee to be able to conduct it until we got that permit. During that time, some of the new regulations came into effect, and we were able to complete 16 days worth of pelican surveys and get 100 completed questionnaires from anglers. But just as we were preparing to collect data for the first time during the gear restriction season, DEP did decline to issue us a permit due to a concern that our surveys would negatively impact the visitor experience. And so we were very obviously bummed by that. You know, we were like, they love us on the pier, they don't want us to leave. But we wanted to honor DEP's request. So we did end our data collection efforts on the pier. Luckily, FWC was able to hire our surveyor to continue the Pelican surveys on the South Pier in combination with an Eckerd College student that was surveying the North Pier for them. So as of the end of March, FWC was able to run an additional 37 surveys on the South Pier. So the results I'll talk about here are just based on those first 53 Pelican surveys and the 100 questionnaires that I was able to complete during that period. So what are the key results that we have thus far? Well, the data would suggest that pelicans are twice as likely to have an injury during the gear restriction season. Both pelicans and anglers prefer section A of the pier, but we don't really see any particular preference for injured pelicans. Anglers appear to have a pretty accurate perception of pelicans on the pier. Most anglers are educated, confident, and concerned about the entanglement issue. They're overwhelmingly supportive of FWC's current educational efforts and even want more enforcement on the pier. And while many don't view the gear restrictions as appropriate, they still expect most anglers to comply with the new rules. And the fact that most anglers are frequent visitors, they're there to have fun and either go alone or with a significant other. This means that we have some clear opportunities here for crafting effective messages to those audiences. So I'm just going to quickly run through each of these key results a little bit more and give you some more detail. And we can talk about them a little bit more at the end if there's time. So here you can see our first key result. You can look at the average number of adult and juvenile pelicans that we spotted near the pier during the gear restriction season and the unrestricted season. We get far more pelicans during the restriction season, obviously, because that's the winter breeding season. That is why it is the season for gear restrictions. But we also see far more juveniles than adults. And this pattern is basically the same when we look at injured pelicans. So it doesn't appear that adults or juveniles are disproportionately at risk of entanglement. Overall, 7% of pelicans that we saw did have injuries during the restriction season compared to just 3% in the unrestricted season. And a lot of those were minor injuries in both seasons, but we do see more moderate injuries in the restriction season. So what does this mean for our work? Well, this will be used as a baseline rate of entanglement for which future seasons can be compared to. And reminder, these are just preliminary results. You can see that we have far more surveys during the restriction season than the unrestricted season. So it's really not a fair comparison yet, but once we have enough data for a fair comparison, we'll be able to use this in combination with prior data from 2019 and 2020 to get a concrete baseline and first year benchmark of entanglement rates. Here you can see the average number of all of our pelicans as well as our injured pelicans cited at those different sections of the pier. Overall, pelicans prefer section A, but injured pelicans, you can see, are a bit more evenly distributed across the pier. And anglers also seem to favor section A, but they also like section B as well. So we were interested in seeing if there was a direct relationship between where anglers go and where pelicans go. And so if we look at sort of a scatter plot in general, I don't know if you can see my mouse, I'm a little hovering over the little example here. If we look at a scatter plot comparing the number of anglers in a given section and the number of pelicans in that same section, we're looking for two types of relationships. So if we see more pelicans going where there are more anglers, this would indicate sort of a degree of attraction to anglers, whereas the opposite, if we see more pelicans preferring spots where anglers are not present, this would be more of an indication of avoidance types of behaviors. But what we actually see in the different sections of the pier here is that there's not much of a relationship going on. Section A, there might be a little weak evidence of some potential avoidance behavior of pelicans, but generally we don't see a clear relationship between where anglers are and where the pelicans actually go. So knowing that section A tends to have more anglers and pelicans, and the reason is not based on the number of anglers, it tells us that Section A is structurally at higher risk for entanglements, and we should probably concentrate our monitoring, enforcement, and outreach efforts in those areas. We're also interested in seeing if anglers' perceptions of pelican abundance aligned with our own objective observations of pelicans in the same place at the same time. So let's say, we've got another scatter plot here showing the number of pelicans that we counted on the pier in a particular section at a particular time, and then the number of pelicans that the anglers said at that same spot at that same time. If anglers were to cite, sort of seeing more pelicans than we actually observed, that would indicate a sort of overestimate bias. And then the opposite is also true. If they said they saw fewer pelicans than we actually saw, it'd be an underestimate bias. And what we see in our preliminary results thus far is that most anglers said there were few or no pelicans. And in reality, yeah, there were few or no pelicans that we saw. And in fact, whenever their perceptions are misaligned with our own pelican counts, we see that more anglers are actually overestimating the number of pelicans in the area, these folks up in here. And so about half of all of our anglers basically, though, had a pretty accurate perception of how many pelicans were on the pier. Now, if this were true, that'd be fantastic, because then we wouldn't have to worry about challenging anglers' perceptions of reality or trying to convince them that there are more pelicans here than they think. But remember, we could only collect this data during the unrestricted season when pelican numbers are a lot lower than they are in the restriction season. So we need to collect more data whenever there's more pelicans present to actually see if these are really accurate perceptions or if the anglers just got lucky that they said 0 and yes, in fact, there are 0 pelicans there. Now, getting into more of those angler characteristics, we found really promising results regarding their perceptions of the entanglement issue. Overall, the majority of anglers are concerned about pelicans dying from entanglements, and they think that most others are concerned as well. And as one person said to me, nobody enjoys hooking a bird, right? It's traumatizing for both anglers and the birds. The vast majority are also very confident they could safely untangle a pelican. And nearly all anglers knew that you should never cut the line if you hook a pelican. So this is great news thus far. The message, don't cut the line, from past campaigns has appeared to have gotten through to most of our anglers, and we likely don't have to worry about dealing with a lack of concern about this issue in our target population. We also have some great news whenever it comes to what anglers think, what would be the most effective solution to the entanglement problem. Here you can see where they sort of overwhelmingly are supportive of online instructional videos, as well as more enforcement or punishment for people caught feeding pelicans on the pier. And so this indicates that anglers have a strong sense of accountability and responsibility. A lot of anglers expressed to me frustration that, entanglements are caused by the 1% of people that don't know or don't care how to behave on the pier. And so there's, this is great for inching us closer to stakeholder resolution and building relationships between anglers and FWC. But it's important to note that the gear restrictions were still considered one of the least effective solutions by the anglers. A lot of them acknowledged that it might do something, but they struggled to see how it could lead to substantial change. So this may ultimately affect their support for current efforts and their perceived trust in FWC and other perceived decision makers for those restrictions. Now, just what did they think of those gear restrictions? Remember, this is data from before the restriction season began, so these reflect their perceptions prior to actually experiencing the restrictions firsthand. So caveat there, but it was good that more than 75% of anglers were aware of the new restrictions. This could be better, but just from a personal observation, it appeared like most of the people who were unfamiliar with the restrictions were usually college students or tourists or just people that rarely came to the pier anyway. Some other good news, most anglers do think that the gear restrictions are easy to follow, and they think that most people will follow the rules or that they would care if they followed the rules. So this indicates that the expected burden imposed by the regulations is relatively low, even though more than half of the anglers said that they expected to be affected. by those restrictions. And there's also this expectation of them to comply with those norms, right? So we have a really powerful effect here on their decisions. But this is more of a reluctant compliance. Anglers are pretty much split down the middle when it comes to how appropriate the restrictions are, how effective they think it'll be, and if they think there'll actually be any enforcement of it on the pier. So there's potentially some work that we could do here in terms of communicating the general theory of change behind the rationale for these gear restrictions if we want to try to increase support for the rules. But again, I'd really love to be able to continue this research so that we can see if and how anglers' perceptions may be changing over time once they've actually experienced fishing on the pier with these new gear restrictions. And then finally, we have some key results that have important implications for future messaging strategies. First, we can see about 2/3 of anglers are frequent visitors, coming either monthly or weekly. Nearly all anglers are coming here to have fun with some added bonus of being able to eat what they catch. And if they aren't going alone, they're usually joined by their spouse or their significant other. And so how can we use this? It tells us that most anglers could have a really high frequency of exposure to any messages we distribute on the pier. And we know that for many behaviors, people need to be exposed to messages many times before it can really sink in. And going back to the angler I mentioned, nobody enjoys hooking a bird. Everyone's there to have a good time and relax. So our messages can play up on that. Avoid the trauma and chaos of, seabird entanglement, right? And the fact that roughly 1/3 of our anglers go to the pier alone is also very useful. Being alone may significantly reduce their likelihood of successfully disentangling a pelican. Even the FWC video recommends one person holding the bird and another working on untangling them. So we really want to target those lone anglers, both for messaging and for monitoring on the pier. And then last, the frequency of these kinds of intra-household companions here signals a huge potential for really powerful subjective norms in future messaging. These internal household relationships, they're typically more influential than relationships we have with our more extended networks of friends and family. So additional targets to those personal intra-household norms would then cover the second most common subset of anglers on the pier. So with all that said, we do have some key recommendations based on this data, as well as just from my personal observations during my time on the pier. We do recommend increasing the consistency in the experimental design of the Pelican surveys. Currently, the data that FWC has makes it very hard to make reliable comparisons between survey days because we don't have an equal number of surveys for each day of the week, each time period, or surveys conducted in the different regulatory seasons. So if we really want to be able to reliably compare surveys, we need to make sure that our sampling design is balanced across all potential confounding factors. Of course, we do hope that DEP will permit us to continue our angler data collection on the pier. As you can see, we've got some fabulous results here that could really lead us to a potential solution to this entanglement problem, but we need more data. We need to be able to estimate compliance with the gear restrictions once that season starts and track if and how their attitudes and perceptions are changing over time. This is really the crux of the question of effectiveness. If we don't know if anglers are actually following the rules, we can't say if the new rules are actually working. And then last, some just additional recommendations I have from personal observations. We do recommend having more resources available for anglers on the pier, especially in languages other than English. There's a lot of Spanish speakers on the pier, a lot of Asian families that are also here that struggle to communicate with me. And so either having more signs, flyers, info cards when you get your park pass, or like an information booth or kiosk in more languages would be really beneficial, especially if we expect, people to be able to comply with the new rules, right? They won't be able to comply if they can't read what it is that's being sent to them. Also, especially the FWC training video, it's only available in English. So having it translated into other languages would be great. And then finally, we recommend having more staff on the pier. Typically, there was usually only one bird rescuer on the pier at a time, and that pier is very, very long, over a mile long. And so if someone hooks a pelican, and the rescuer is on the opposite end of the pier, it can take up to 10 minutes before they're able to reach them in their little golf cart. So I think having more people, at least 2, so that they can more evenly distribute themselves across the pier would be great. And also having more staff, more custodial staff to clean up all of the sort of abandoned filament, the hooks, bait, and bottles, a lot of really common types of litter that are frequently on the pier that I personally think might actually be one of the biggest threats to pelicans on the pier. But with that, just some quick nitty-gritty key results that we have here. Happy to talk more about any of the methods or dive deeper into any of those results, but keen to hear what you guys think and any feedback that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you, Blake.
Any questions for Blake?
Yeah, we're bringing this information to you because, a lot of this socio-ecological data is sort of the direction we're moving as a program. That's one of the reasons we brought Blake aboard, to really investigate the human dimension, especially with how we better manage the natural systems. Any natural resource management question is centered around how do we manage human behavior, and without understanding perceptions and those behaviors, especially when new regulations are in place, I think we leave a significant gap of knowledge on the plate of how we could be more effective in promoting those regulations. So we're hoping that we'll be able to continue to pursue these angler surveys on the Skyway Fishing Pier. We're going to reapply for that permit ahead of the upcoming regulation period, but any support that boards want to throw along that line, we would welcome that as well. Please talk to FWC, DEP, and the value of having this information on hand to better tailor our messaging, our education to those anglers, so that we're all reaching the common goals that we're trying to achieve, less pelican entanglements ultimately on that fishing pier. So welcome any other comments that you all have on it as well.
Has this been presented to any of the birding groups that do a lot of rescues out there?
Yep, so we had actually Blake gave this pretty much similar presentation to Audubon, as well as Robin Boughton, Beth Fries at FWC, Jeff Leakey at Audubon, as well as DEP and other FWC representatives.
But not the transporters or rescuers.
I think
we did have some, oh, sorry. I was just going to add that we did have some of the rescuers employed on the pier. Some of them did attend, so we were able to include them in the conversation as well.
I think our intent was to present this information to the agency partners first and to you all as part of our management conference, but we would like to present these results to a broader audience like the Agency on Bay Management and then directly with some of the other interested groups.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the inability to get that permit so that you can do the work during the restricted gear season? Is that something that's going to pop up again, or?
I think
it's probably.
Go ahead, Blake.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, it's probable. What we got from FDEP was, sort of, as I said, they declined because they were concerned that it would negatively affect the experience of visitors on the pier. And so, we are going to apply for a permit to continue this again from DEP. Just because, they have declined it in the past, we expected them to be thinking of that same issue again, but we're really hoping now, with the results that we have, and showing, just how excited anglers were to take the survey. They looked forward to seeing me, coming back again onto the pier because they really wanted to take it again and get more hooks from me. And so we're hoping that, putting these results together, showing that, hey, these results actually aren't scary. They look really promising. Anglers are having a great time. They're getting free stuff out of it and free, environmentally friendly, hooks out of it. So hopefully, it's kind of a situation where everybody is benefiting and everybody's happy. So we're hoping that, this time around, we can more sort of successfully make the case and be more convincing of the positives that come from this result.
Because the social science research is something that's like a little bit more cutting edge here in the region, I think that there were some reasons that the department was apprehensive, but now we've got information to show them that what we found isn't anything that's, problematic, I think, for any of the regulatory interests, and the concerns that they had about the user experience are probably unfounded. So they'll still get to make that decision. So we understand that that's a possibility, but we hope that now that we've done a little bit, they can see the value, and we hope that you all help us build that case for support for this kind of research, because it's so important.
And they're receiving appropriate gear and terminal tackle that would be approved for use during the more restricted period.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Thank you, Blake. All right.
Thanks, Blake.
Additional packet information, Maya?
Not going to belabor it, but the main thing I want to call your attention to is we do not have this room reserved for August 9th. There's another meeting conflict. Instead, we'll be meeting at the Whedon Island Preserve and Natural History Center on August 9th. So please make a note on your calendars.
Any other information folks want to share? I just wanted to share that we haven't probably heard this word in a long time, but multi-year implementation plan on Pot 1 Restore Act stuff for those counties that are still receiving money. We obviously finished our first plan. All those projects were implemented. We're proposing to allocate a portion of the funds to septic tank abandonment to support the various septic to sewer conversions going on in Pinellas County, so for cities and the unincorporated area. I've already reached out to, we've got Dunedin doing a project, and Rajesh is interested in St. Pete, so we're going to be reaching out to the cities to see kind of how much we need to put in that pot to help offset the cost to the homeowner. You can only use Restore Act for the abandonment piece, actually. And then some living shoreline work, again, to augment what's going on up in Philippi, but also Fort DeSoto has some challenges over near the park, near the campgrounds, where an old seawall is being overwashed, and we're looking at potential kind of living shoreline type design there. So just wanted to share what our current plans are for as we're with the pot that we have. What is it now? Just over 3 million right now? Yeah, so when we put that out to, we have to do a 45-day public comment period. I'd appreciate thumbs up. Anything else anyone wants to share? Oh, all right. Well, meeting is adjourned.